The cold rain hammered down on the streets, the sound of it mingling with the thrum of distant city traffic. In the middle of this urban storm stood a young Tycoon, his finely tailored suit soaked through, the sharp cut of his face twisted in disbelief. His eyes fixed on a small figure ahead, barely visible through the downpour. It was a girl, no older than 10, standing in the middle of the sidewalk alone, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Her wide, haunting eyes stared directly into his, as if she could see through him, tearing away the layers of pretense he had so carefully built. She wasn't afraid of him, nor the rain. She wasn't afraid of anything. "I don't need your pity. I just want my mom back," the girl said, her voice cold but fierce, her words cutting through the rain like a blade. The Tycoon's chest tightened as his breath caught. Her words struck deeper than anything he had ever felt. His world, once so neatly structured, now seemed like a shattered puzzle. How had he ended up here, in this moment? How had his life, so meticulously crafted, led him to this child, standing in the pouring rain with nothing but a broken promise to her mother? He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in his throat. He was a businessman, a man who never showed weakness. Yet, as he stood there, looking at this little girl, the weight of all his past decisions seemed to crush him in an instant. The Tycoon blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, but the tears mixed with the rain, blurring everything in front of him. His thoughts scattered. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt something real. He had made millions by exploiting weakness, capitalizing on the pain of others. Yet in the presence of this child, this orphan whose life had been torn apart by the very system he had helped build, he felt helpless. The words, "I just want my mom back," echoed in his ears, each one a painful reminder of the things he had failed to protect. His chest tightened as he recalled the woman, the girl's mother, the one person he had promised to help, only to watch her die alone. He thought he was untouchable, but now, standing in front of this girl, he realized how wrong he had been. What had he become? What kind of man stood by and watched lives like hers be shattered, all for the sake of profit? "I saw her die. She was everything to me," the girl said, her voice raw with grief. "But you don't know what it's like to lose someone you love." The words stung him harder than the rain ever could. He had lost so much in his life, his family, his innocence, his moral compass. But this was something different. This child in her anger was forcing him to confront every piece of himself he had buried for years. He thought he could numb the pain, compartmentalize it, but standing here with this girl, he realized that the ache he had been running from had never truly gone away. He had spent his life accumulating wealth and power, but at what cost? His entire existence had been about taking, not giving. And now, standing before him was the one person he could never repay, this girl who had lost everything because of men like him. The Tycoon's thoughts were spiraling, his mind racing through every possible scenario, yet the truth remained undeniable. He had promised her, her mother, that he would help. He had made her a promise when her life was still whole, before everything was torn apart. But now? Now her mother was gone, and the only thing he could offer the orphan girl was empty words and a shattered apology. He wanted to scream at the world for taking her mother from her. He wanted to scream at himself for not doing more, but there were no words left. The girl's raw honesty hit harder than any punch could. He had spent years building his empire, surrounding himself with sycophants who praised him, and a world that feared him. But in this moment, standing in the cold rain with nothing but a broken promise, he felt like the smallest man alive. "I was supposed to save her," he whispered, the guilt choking him. And now he couldn't even save the girl who remained. In the distance, the sound of a car approaching, the headlights cutting through the mist. But neither of them moved. The Tycoon stood there, frozen in the rain, unable to reconcile what he had become with what he should have been. He had never been the hero of his own story. He was always the villain. But standing here with the rain pouring down on him and the girl's gaze still piercing through him, he realized how deeply he had failed. The car stopped, but neither of them looked up. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, but the words felt hollow. Instead, he watched as she turned her back to him and began walking slowly toward the street corner. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was simply moving on. And in that moment, the Tycoon felt an overwhelming sense of loss. The girl, the storm, the city, they had all become symbols of everything he had missed, everything he had ignored. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. But this time, there was no one left to hear it. The Tycoon didn't know how long he stood there, drenched and broken, watching as the girl disappeared into the storm. Something inside him was cracking, like the storm outside was a reflection of the storm within him. He had never known guilt like this, never understood the weight of someone else's pain. For the first time, his accomplishments, his wealth, and his status felt like a distant echo. What was the point of all of it if he couldn't protect the ones who needed him most? He had spent so long burying his emotions beneath layers of success and ambition that he couldn't remember the last time he felt anything beyond the thrill of the deal. But now, standing in this cold, unforgiving rain, he felt like a stranger to himself. "I should have done more," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. There was no turning back now, and he knew it. The girl had walked away, and his chance to make things right felt just as distant as the fading lights of her figure. Yet something inside him told him that this was just the beginning, that the weight of this moment would follow him, even if he tried to run. The next day, the Tycoon couldn't shake the image of her face, the orphan girl who had seen through him like no one else ever had. His mind kept returning to her words, "I just want my mom back." It echoed in his thoughts, a constant reminder of the emptiness that lingered in his life. He tried to focus on his business, to push the memory away, but it followed him like a shadow. He couldn't escape it, not even in the comfort of his penthouse, high above the chaos of the city. He poured himself a drink, the alcohol burning down his throat, but it did nothing to erase the image of that girl, standing there, strong and resolute, while he had been a man drowning in his own regrets. He wanted to forget. He wanted to return to his old life where everything had a price and everything could be controlled. But something had changed. The girl, her pain, had opened something in him that he couldn't close. He thought about her mother. He had failed her. And now, somehow, it felt as though the girl was holding him accountable. He couldn't shake the sense that his life, once so meticulously structured, was beginning to unravel. Weeks passed, but the girl remained in his thoughts. He began looking for her, searching the streets where he had first seen her, hoping for a glimpse of her small figure amidst the chaos of the city. But she was gone, as though she had never been there in the first place. No one knew her name. No one could tell him where she went. It was as if she had vanished, just like her mother. He threw himself back into work, diving deeper into the deals, the meetings, and the distractions that had once kept him numb. But the image of that girl, the way she had looked at him with eyes full of loss and defiance, wouldn't leave him. She had been a reminder of something he had long buried. The part of him that still cared, the part that wanted to make a difference, but didn't know how. He had been so afraid of weakness, of vulnerability, and now it seemed like it was the only thing left in him. The emptiness he had been running from was finally catching up. He needed to do something. He couldn't ignore it anymore. It had been a month since he last saw her. He had almost given up on finding her, but something inside him refused to let it go. He couldn't stop wondering where she was, what had happened to her, and if she was okay. He knew she didn't need his help, but he needed to make amends. That much he understood now. It wasn't about pity or charity. It was about redemption. He had been so consumed with his own success that he had failed to see the humanity in the people around him. But the orphan girl had reminded him of something that he had lost along the way. The ability to care, to truly care for others, without expecting anything in return. And now, that very humanity was calling him, pulling him out of the comfortable cage he had built for himself. His thoughts turned back to her mother. Had he failed her too? He couldn't keep ignoring the questions, the guilt. He had to find her, and he had to make things right. The search for the orphan girl had brought him to the most unlikely of places. A small community center, tucked in the corner of a run-down part of the city, was where he found the first clue. An old woman with kind eyes looked up from her knitting as he entered. "You're looking for her, aren't you?" she asked, before he could even speak. The Tycoon froze, surprised by her intuition. He nodded slowly. "I just want to help her. I made a promise." The woman sighed, her face full of sadness. "She's gone, but she's not the only one who's been lost." The Tycoon's heart sank. She told him the girl had disappeared, just like her mother. But her words held something more. There was something unfinished about the girl's story, something he couldn't ignore. The woman's last words echoed in his mind, "You can't save them all, but you can still try." And in that moment he realized that it wasn't just the girl he was searching for, it was himself. He wasn't looking to fix her. He was looking for redemption, for a chance to heal the part of himself he had abandoned long ago. The Tycoon stood in front of the small community center, staring at the worn door that had given him the first real clue about the orphan girl. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest. For weeks, he had been running from his past, from the consequences of his ambition and greed. But now, standing in this place, surrounded by the remnants of a broken world, he felt something shift. The old woman's words echoed in his mind, "You can't save them all, but you can still try." He had spent so much time building his empire, acquiring wealth, and controlling every aspect of his life. But what had it all been for? The city, the skyscrapers, the luxurious life, all of it felt empty now. He looked at the community center again, the people who lived in its shadow. They had nothing but each other. They didn't need his money. They needed him to care. He needed to care. "Maybe I've been looking for the wrong things," he whispered to himself. "Maybe it's time to start looking for something real." The days that followed blurred together as the Tycoon tried to immerse himself in something other than his wealth. He visited the community center more often, speaking with people, helping in small ways, organizing food drives, contributing to repairs. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. But despite his efforts, something still felt missing. The girl, the one who had turned his world upside down, was still a ghost in his mind. He hadn't found her, and he was beginning to wonder if he ever would. But it didn't matter. What mattered now was that he was trying, truly trying to change. He had always been a man of control, but now he had to learn to live without it. He couldn't force this girl's return, couldn't fix the broken past. But maybe, just maybe, he could start to heal. The feeling of guilt still haunted him, but now there was something else growing inside him, hope. He wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but he knew he couldn't let it slip away. A week passed, and the Tycoon found himself standing on the same street where he had first seen the orphan girl. It was late, the city around him still alive with the hum of traffic and neon lights. He had grown accustomed to the quiet moments here, the sense of peace that came with the hum of the city's pulse. But tonight was different. Tonight he felt the weight of everything he had done, or hadn't done. The girl's words played in his head once more. "I just want my mom back." He was so close to understanding, so close to realizing that it wasn't just about his redemption. It was about hers too. She had been the one who had lost everything, and he had been the one who could have made it right. But now she was gone, and he had nothing to offer her but an apology and an empty promise. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had built an empire, the hands that had failed to protect her. "I can't change the past," he murmured to himself. "But I can keep trying." It was late in the evening when he received a call. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the words were unmistakable. "We've found her." The Tycoon's heart raced as he gripped the phone tighter, disbelief mixing with a surge of hope. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice shaky. The voice on the other end gave him an address, a place he recognized, a run-down part of town where the forgotten lived, the ones who had slipped through the cracks of society. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he didn't care. He had failed her before, but this time he wasn't going to make the same mistake. He wasn't going to let her slip away again. The time for excuses was over. He grabbed his coat and rushed out of his penthouse, determined to do what he should have done all along, make things right. The taxi ride to the address felt like an eternity. Each minute that passed made his anxiety grow. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a world that had swallowed the girl whole. A world where there was no room for hope, only survival. When the taxi finally stopped, he found himself standing at the edge of a crumbling building, the street around him dark and desolate. He hesitated for a moment, but then he saw her, a small figure standing in the doorway, watching him with the same intense gaze he remembered from that fateful night. The girl. She hadn't changed much, except now, she looked more tired, more hardened. But she was still standing, still fighting. The Tycoon took a deep breath and walked toward her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I should have done more. I promise, I'll do better." The girl didn't say anything, but her eyes softened just slightly, a glimmer of something. The faintest trace of hope flickered in them. The rain had stopped, but the tension still hung in the air. The orphan girl stood in front of him, her arms crossed, her eyes guarded. The Tycoon felt the weight of the silence between them, a chasm that seemed too vast to bridge. He had come all this way, walked through the ruins of his own life to find her, and now that he was standing face to face with her, he didn't know where to begin. The words seemed inadequate, as if no apology, no offer of help, could ever make up for the years he had ignored her pain. She was a child who had lost everything, and he was a man who had spent his life building walls around his heart. She didn't need his pity. She didn't need his money. What she needed was something he wasn't sure he could give. Trust. He opened his mouth, but the words still felt too small. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "But I'm here, and I'm going to do everything I can to make things right." The girl didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a step back, as if weighing his words. The Tycoon's heart raced, his mind screaming for her to say something, anything. He had spent years running away from responsibility, from the reality of his own failures, but standing in front of this child, it was clear that there was no escape from the truth. She had suffered, and he had done nothing to help her or her mother. The guilt burned inside him, but this was different now. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't asking for anything from her at all. He was only offering one thing, a chance to make up for the years lost. But she wasn't ready to accept it. "You can't fix everything," she said softly, her voice like a knife cutting through the thick air. "You can't change what happened." Her words hit him harder than anything, and for a moment he thought he might crumble. But instead, he stood taller, more certain than he had ever been. "Maybe I can't change the past," he said, his voice steadier now. "But I can help you now. I can make sure you don't have to face this alone anymore." There was a long pause. The girl continued to study him, her gaze unwavering, as if trying to decipher the truth behind his words. It wasn't the first time someone had made promises to her. Her life had been full of empty promises, hollow words from people who didn't care enough to follow through. But this was different. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure what to believe. She had been forced to grow up too fast, to trust only herself. Yet, there was something about the Tycoon's presence, something in the way he stood there, vulnerable, yet determined, that made her wonder if he might actually mean it. "You don't know anything about what I've been through," she said, her voice sharp, but there was a tremor in it, a crack of doubt that she quickly masked. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." The Tycoon swallowed, his throat tight. "No," he replied quietly, "I don't, but I know what it's like to lose myself, and I'm trying to find my way back. If you'll let me, I'll help you find yours." The moments stretched on, each one more painful than the last. The Tycoon could feel his heart racing as he waited for her response. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. But he could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of being let down again. She had been abandoned so many times, betrayed by the very people who should have protected her. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could show her that there was still hope. "I know I can't change everything," he said softly, his voice almost pleading now. "But I can offer you something, I can offer you a chance at a future that isn't built on the past. A future where you don't have to be alone. She hesitated again, and then slowly she uncrossed her arms. Her expression softened just the slightest bit, as if a small wall was crumbling. I don't trust people easily, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But I'll give you a chance. In that moment, the Tycoon realized that this wasn't about him at all. It wasn't about saving face or salvaging his reputation. It was about giving someone else a chance at a better life, a life free from the burden of their past. He had spent so much of his life focused on himself, on his empire, on his own needs, that he had forgotten what it meant to help someone else, without expecting anything in return. But standing here with the orphan girl in front of him, he understood now. He wasn't her savior. He wasn't even sure he could fix everything that had been broken in her life. But he could be there. And that, for now, was enough. You don't have to be alone anymore, he said, his voice calm but resolute. I'll be here, whatever you need. The girl nodded, a small, cautious smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was something. A glimmer of hope, just enough to begin anew. Over the next few weeks, the Tycoon and the orphan girl began to form an unlikely bond. They didn't speak much at first, but there was a shared understanding between them. He helped her with small tasks around the community center, fixing broken windows, painting walls, organizing food drives. But it was in the moments of silence that he felt the most connection. She still kept her distance, but now there was less hostility in her gaze. Slowly, her walls started to crack, and the small steps toward trust became a little easier for both of them. He didn't need to fix her, and she didn't need to forgive him. What they needed, what they both needed, was time. Time to heal. Time to rebuild. There were still days when the weight of the past felt unbearable, but there was something different now. When he looked at her, he no longer saw the broken, lost child. He saw someone who had survived, someone who was still standing despite everything. And that, in itself, was enough. One evening, as they worked late into the night, the girl finally spoke up. You don't have to keep doing this, she said, her voice quiet but steady. The Tycoon paused, glancing at her over his shoulder. Doing what? He asked, genuinely confused. Helping, she said, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her words. You don't have to help me. I'm fine. The Tycoon lowered his head, his hands still gripping the tools in front of him. He knew she didn't mean it in a cruel way. She had learned long ago to rely on herself, to trust no one but herself. But that didn't mean he had to stop trying. I'm not doing this for you, he said, his voice surprisingly firm. I'm doing this for me, for the person I want to be. I can't change everything, but I can make sure I don't keep making the same mistakes. The girl was silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. But don't expect me to make it easy. Days turned into weeks, and the changes, though small, began to accumulate. The Tycoon started seeing the world differently. His interactions with the people at the community center, his conversations with the girl, everything felt more real, more grounded. He no longer saw people as means to an end or problems to be solved. He started to see them as human beings, with their own stories, their own struggles. The girl still kept her distance, but he could see the cracks in her armor. She had started to smile more, to speak more openly, though she still guarded herself fiercely. But there were moments, small moments, when she would reach out, a fleeting look of trust in her eyes. And in those moments, the Tycoon felt something stir inside him. Maybe this was what he had been searching for all along, real, honest connection. It wasn't the validation of success or the applause of the world. It was this. The quiet understanding between two people who had been broken, and who were slowly, painfully, piecing themselves back together. One evening, the girl came to the Tycoon as he was preparing to leave the center for the night. I don't need to go back to that place, she said quietly, looking down at her shoes, unsure of how to say it. The Tycoon turned, surprised by her words. What do you mean? He asked, his voice soft. I don't need to go back to the shelter, she repeated. I can stay here, with you. The tycoon felt a lump form in his throat. She had been so independent, so closed off for so long, and now here she was, offering a sliver of trust, a hope for something more. He smiled gently, his heart swelling with emotion. You don't have to stay with me if you don't want to, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. But I promise you, you'll never be alone again. For the first time he truly understood what it meant to offer someone a future. A future not defined by their past, but by the choices they made today. The girl's face softened, and she gave him a small, tentative smile. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The days that followed were the beginning of something new. The tycoon continued to spend time at the community center, but now, there was a sense of purpose behind his actions. It wasn't about fixing what was broken, it was about creating something new, something better. And with the girl by his side, he began to understand that life wasn't just about wealth or success. It was about the relationships we build, the connections we make, and the people we choose to stand by. They didn't have to have everything figured out. They didn't have to be perfect. They just had to keep trying. And that was enough. The tycoon no longer felt like a stranger in his own life. He had found something worth living for, something that gave his life meaning. He wasn't running anymore. He was moving forward. With the girl by his side, he knew that anything was possible. The tycoon woke up earlier than usual the next morning. He didn't need an alarm anymore. His thoughts had become enough to rouse him from sleep. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond business meetings or deadlines. The girl who had once been a ghost in his life was now an anchor. She had made him realize that what mattered most wasn't the wealth he had accumulated or the empire he had built. It was the people around him, the bonds he had formed, and the responsibility he had toward them. He walked into the kitchen to find her already there, sitting at the table, working on some school assignments. Her posture had softened in recent weeks, and she looked up at him with a small but genuine smile. Good morning, she said, her voice less guarded now, as if she had come to trust that he would be there, just as he had promised. For the first time, the tycoon didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world. He felt light, as though a burden had been lifted, even though the road ahead was still uncertain. As the days passed, they settled into a routine, each day adding a little more to the fragile trust that had begun to form. But, even as they worked together and shared quiet moments, the tycoon couldn't help but feel the weight of the world still pressing down on him. His past was always there, just beneath the surface lurking. But with the girl by his side, it was becoming easier to push the guilt aside. One evening, as they worked late in the community center, he asked her, "How did you survive?" She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment he wondered if he had overstepped. But then she looked up from her work and met his gaze, her eyes full of quiet strength. "I didn't survive," she said softly. "I just kept going, one day at a time." Her words stung him in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't about surviving. It was about choosing to live each day, no matter how hard it seemed. And in that moment, he realized that she had already taught him something far more valuable than any business deal he had ever made: the art of living with purpose. A few weeks later, the tycoon received a call that changed everything. The news of his company's merger, one he had worked for years to orchestrate, was finally official. The deal would elevate him to a position of power he had always dreamed of. It was everything he had worked for. But as the call ended, he realized that it didn't feel like a victory. He stood by the window of his office. The skyline stretched out before him, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant. He thought about the girl, her quiet strength, her ability to live in the moment despite everything she had lost. What would it mean for him now to achieve what he had always wanted, only to find it empty of meaning? When the girl walked in later, he looked up at her, conflicted. "I don't know if I want this anymore," he confessed, his voice quiet, uncertain. She tilted her head, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" she asked. The tycoon paused for a long moment. "I thought this would fix everything," he said, the weight of his realization heavy in the air. "But now, I'm not sure it's what I need. The girl listened quietly, her gaze steady. She didn't rush to comfort him, but she didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes, offering the space he needed to work through his own feelings. She understood more than anyone else ever could. "What do you want to do?" she finally asked, her voice gentle but direct. It was a question that seemed so simple, but to the Tycoon it was the hardest one he had ever been asked. He thought for a moment before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to stop running. I want to stop chasing things that don't matter." The girl nodded. "That sounds like a good start," she said simply. And for the first time, the Tycoon felt like he wasn't chasing something unattainable. He was finding his way back, one step at a time. It had been a long road, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But in the end, the Tycoon knew that the journey was worth it. He had found something real, something that mattered more than wealth or status. He had found the girl, the connection he had been searching for without even knowing it. They stood together, side by side, as the sun began to set over the city, the glow of the horizon casting a soft, golden light around them. There was no grand declaration, no final triumph. It was simply the quiet understanding that they had come this far together. And that was enough. "We're not finished yet," the Tycoon said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I know we'll get there. Together." A year had passed, and the Tycoon had left his empire behind. The orphan girl, no longer a ghost, had become his family. Together they rebuilt the community center and found purpose in helping others. The Tycoon no longer felt the weight of his past. Watching the girl laugh with the children, he realized he had found what he was searching for all along. "This is enough," he whispered to himself. At dinner, the girl said, "I never thought anyone would care about me." The Tycoon replied, "You're not alone anymore." As their hands met across the table, she didn't pull away, and they shared a moment of true connection. There was no grand gesture, just the quiet comfort of knowing they were finally there for each other. The Tycoon stood by the window, reflecting on how much had changed. He was no longer the man he once was, driven only by ambition. He had found purpose in simple moments with the girl. She had taught him the true meaning of living, and together they had built a new life. Walking through the city, the girl admitted, "I used to be afraid of people. But I'm tired of being afraid." The Tycoon smiled, saying, "We'll face it together." The city no longer felt overwhelming. They were ready to face whatever came next, side by side. At sunset, the Tycoon and the girl stood on a hill, overlooking the city. "We've come a long way," the Tycoon said. The girl nodded, her expression soft with understanding. They had faced the hardest parts of their journeys, but now, together, they knew they could face anything.